Well, Gavin, thank you so much for making time and sharing your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you share with us where you're from, where did you grow up, what was your early career about?
My early years, I was born in Port Elizabeth on the east coast of South Africa and essentially schooled there. I went to university there too, and I was there for pretty much half of my life. So I was very privileged to go to one of the best schools in South Africa and a fledgling university at the time, the University of Port Elizabeth, which is today called the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University. And I had various plans as a youngster, like we all did. I think when I was about 8 years of age, I wanted to be an engine driver because I was fascinated with trains. And then a little later in my life, I realized that perhaps being an engine driver was not the best decision. But so be it, as a youngster. But in terms of seriousness, I wanted to be a veterinary surgeon. And unfortunately, my maths grades didn't get me into Onderstepoort to be able to study veterinary science. And then clinical psychology was something that really interested me. And you can see just how diverse my thought processes were at a very early stage. And then ultimately, I became a marketer, which I was very pleased that I took that decision eventually.
So who or what inspired you to follow this career and get into marketing and sport?
I think one person stands out for me, a guy called Tom Peters, who's a marketing guru from the United States. And the reason why he really stands out is that very early in my career, I was thrust into management and leadership positions, both on and off the sports field, because I played a lot of sport in this country too. And at Volkswagen South Africa, we did a program called Towards Excellence, which was based on a book called In Search of Excellence. And Tom Peters was the author of that book, and I just learned so much from that, and I was so inspired by this man, and I had the privilege of meeting him at the launch of his book Reimagine. And when I discussed In Search of Excellence, he said to me, he said, that book is very redundant now. And I said to him, I don't think it is. I think there's still many, many principles that you brought to the fore in that book that are still applicable today, and certainly that I use too. So he was at an early stage a man that really was a huge inspiration for me business-wise.
And when and where did you meet him?
He was here in Cape Town, out on a business trip, and I was, able to attend his presentation. And he's quite a remarkable man. He's a little bit eccentric, which I think a lot of very special people and leaders in the world today can be. But a very genuine, a very authentic man, and a man certainly for whom marketing is an ongoing journey. It's not complete, You'd think, well, a book In Search of Excellence should probably tell you everything, but it doesn't. And of course, he's written many books after that, and he has, could I use the word, disrupted the marketing world in a lot of ways.
Can you tell us a little bit about your sporting career?
I can, yeah. I come from a sporting family, Nick, and my mother was one of the best tennis players in South Africa, and her two brothers both played very good cricket, one of them for our country, for South Africa. So I was brought up with a ball, so to speak, and I had a lot of opportunities, and luckily I grabbed them, and my focus was primarily on cricket, rugby and field hockey. Those were the three sports that I played at provincial level and above in our country. For a long period of time, so it was a lot of fun. And I mentioned just now that I worked for Volkswagen South Africa, which was a wonderful learning experience for me too. But I always hankered to get back into sport, and my opportunities came eventually when I was able to work for a sporting brand for a very long period of time, until my retirement from mainstream business, and that was Adidas. I won't want to call it the German company because it's very much a global company, but headquartered in Germany. So sport was very much part of my life. It continues to be too, because I'm a rugby commentator for SuperSport. So post my career, I continued, working in the sporting environment, and I continue to do it today too. I have close attachments to sport, and it is very much part of my life.
So how did you get into Adidas?
Well, The amazing thing is that I was a sponsored athlete of Adidas when I was playing sport. So I was one of the...
As a rugby player?
As a cricket player too, you know. So I don't want to call it the chosen few, but one of the lucky ones that was sponsored by the company. They used the word sponsored in those days, not partnered. And so for 10 years, I was loyal to the brand. And somewhere along the line, I think that registered with the individuals. I also am a great believer in luck being where opportunity meets preparedness. And when I was in Cape Town playing sport, I always used to go to the headquarters of Adidas and have a cup of tea with the guys and just thank them and offer my services beyond the call of duty if it was needed. And I think these things resonated with the guys there. So when the opportunity came for them to try and find somebody in a marketing capacity, they approached me. And initially, I was fairly well settled in what I was doing. But after a period of time, I took the gap and I never looked back. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Was there a turning point or maybe a number of turning points in your career?
There were some turning points. I think I mentioned Volkswagen South Africa a little bit earlier, and my immediate boss there, I was in a management position, was a guy called Ronnie Kruger, who was a quite remarkable person, who taught me so much. And that's why I really enjoyed the time that I was there, which was not a very long time. It was a couple of years. But he taught me a lot. And one of the stories that he did teach me when at my first opportunity to meet up with him, his first question to me was, what is your attitude towards vacational leave? And I was quite shocked by that as a little youngster fresh out of university, and I gave the wrong answer. You know, I said it would depend on my workload, I think. And he took this big finger out and pointed it at me and very neatly said to me, you will not do it that way. You will take leave twice a year because I need you to go and recharge your batteries for yourself, myself, and our brand, Volkswagen South Africa, so that you're always fresh. It was little things like that that he taught me a lot of. And that's why when I made the decision to eventually leave, because I wanted to get back into sport, I felt that I'd learned a lot at VW and from certain individuals like Ronnie Kruger. So it was a tough decision to make. But the turning point for me was that I needed to get back into sport. I really wanted to. I'd been offered a really great position in marketing at Adidas. And there I was able to work with some very, very special people. And the dynamics of sport at the time, I think, just lent itself to the opportunity to be part of nation building in South Africa. We were going through turbulent times and changing times. And, you know, again, I think the role model of many of us is the great Nelson Mandela. And, you know, when he spoke about sport having the power to change the world and being the glue that binds the nation of South Africa, I thought, this is great. You know, I'm actually part of something more than just what I love. I'm actually, perhaps in a very, very small way, also helping to contribute to this country becoming a special country in the future.
So what do you consider the highlights in your career at Adidas?
I think there's one thing that really stands out, Nick, and I think I could probably say that there were a number of things, but I'd pick one out because I had planned to retire at an earlier age than formal retirement, which was 60 at Adidas. And I was approached by our headquarters in Germany to run the FIFA World Cup 2010, the biggest sporting event in the world. Adidas having a very formal role with FIFA and being a global sponsor and supporter of the event, meaning that it was a huge and very important event for our country. And I was approached to lead that event from a local perspective in South Africa. And it wasn't an African World Cup, so to speak, but obviously there was a lot to be done in our country and at a time where, you know, there were a lot of challenges, but it was perhaps the most wonderful event that I've ever been involved with from a business perspective. And it was a lengthy one too. It wasn't just in 2010, you know, the lead up started in 2006 and basically I closed the books at the end of 2012 and I'd like to think that it was a very successful book too.
And I'm sure you were involved in the 2006 World Cup in Germany?
I was. In fact, I've been involved from an adidas perspective with FIFA World Cups, so that's football, soccer as we call it in South Africa, going back some years, right back to 1990. And so I've attended all these events. I've attended the Olympic Games, where we've been very involved too as a brand over the years, and many other global events too. But 2006 in Germany was for me very special because it was a learning curve for me. And I could see just how the nation of Germany was transformed by that World Cup. Even although Germany didn't even play in the final, they didn't win that World Cup. You know, the nation itself was incredibly well united through some very, very basic concepts. And one of them was, you know, it's time to make friends. And seeing the German people waving their flags in 2006, which they now do today, and which they didn't really do before then, gave me an indication of just how sport could make a difference. So that was 2006. We had ours in 2010, and then in 2014, of course, it was in Brazil, and I spent a bit of time with the Brazilian adidas team, you know, sharing a lot of things, because I think that Brazil and South Africa are very similar nations in a lot of ways, and perhaps there were some key learnings that they could pick up from us. And so I saw those 3 World Cups in a very different light to the ones that I'd attended, more as an attendee previously, you know. And I just felt that all 3 of them did so much for those countries that that would, far and above anything else, be a real highlight of my business life.
So in hindsight, how would you rate the legacy of your World Cup, the 2010 World Cup? Looking back, what would you say did remain? What changed?
I think the important things to consider here, I need to give you another example. In 1995, we hosted the Rugby World Cup in South Africa, and I happened to be one of the commentators for the final match, which was between South Africa and New Zealand. So that was a very special occasion for me, and my expectations were, post the event, that it would be incredibly uniting in our country. And I can remember walking out of the commentary booth after the match, and at one point in time heading into the streets of Johannesburg in Doornfontein, where Ellis Park, the stadium was sited, and seeing all these people of South Africans embracing and joyous, and people of color, you know, people, white people, black people, Indian people, colored folk, were all together and celebrating. And it was quite incredible to see that, because it might sound quite strange to an outsider, but that was not a common occurrence in our country. Mostly you would find that at a sporting event, and maybe a music event too. And I felt that we, as a country, didn't capitalize on that. We lost the opportunity of really making a difference through a world event like that. And so when the FIFA World Cup 2010 came along, again, my thoughts were always, how can we sustain this? Whatever we achieve here, how can we sustain it? And I think we've certainly done a lot more than we did in 1995, and maybe that was quite early too. We were a more established democracy in 2010. And I think what happened was that there were a number of things that were put in place at that point in time are legacies to the event itself. And, you know, those might be very simple things like infrastructure, for example, you know, how we deal with tourism, because these were things that were needed at that point in time. And sometimes people overlook those things and the importance thereof. You know, your road infrastructure, for one thing, has been enormously improved. So I think the World Cup in 2010 brought the opportunity for us to fast track and fast forward a lot of what we were doing in our country. The key question, though, is how did it influence nation building? What actually happened then, and what is happening today in that respect? And again, I think there's a lot of work to be done. You know, we see every now and then something happens and we become very elated as a nation together, and quite often, as I said, it's a sporting event that does that, you know. But there are other things that do that too, you know, and bring opportunities for people to get a bit closer together. But I still believe that it's work in progress, and I'd like to see that becomes even stronger in the life going forward, because our country is so full of amazing people, Nick. And I'd like to raise entrepreneurs in this country, because we have such a high unemployment rate. Maybe we've been forced into it, but I think latently we as a nation have so many people that have this ability to to build things, to provide things, to startups, to whatever it might be, you know. And maybe these are things that we need to hasten ahead, and we need people to help and influence those people to become better than what they are. I've done some work with two young entrepreneurs in Khayelitsha, one of the bigger townships in South Africa, down in Cape Town. And the one is running a coffee business, the other is baking spinach bread. And the creative enthusiasm that comes from these people is enormous. And what they really need is they need fine-tuning of their business models and, you know, some direction from time to time. And I think that so many people in this country, if we talk about leadership, you know, this is the sort of thing, and these are the sort of people that you want to work with, you know, to make them better than what they are. And that principally is one of the things that I really want to do and have been doing since I retired from mainstream business, you know, as a purpose, is to assist people and make them better than what they are.
So Gavin, what would you say is driving you today?
What's driving me essentially is knowledge transfer, and if I might say it, wisdom transfer too. You know, having been a person that's finished or completed a formal career in business, you learn a lot, so you have a lot of knowledge, and hopefully I have some wisdom too. So for me is the opportunity to share that with other people, you know. I was thrust into a leadership and a management position at a very young age, both on and off the sports fields. And so I've learned a lot. I've made mistakes, but ultimately I'm able, I think, to also share a lot of those, not only the good things, but the bad things too with people, you know, and young people. So in the mentoring process, which I'm involved with currently, and some of the teaching that I'm doing at a business school, I draw on what has happened in the past, good and bad, and share that with people, you know, and I think that learning is very, very important for them. So that's essentially what's driving me, because I do believe that we have so many good people in this country, so many who are in my position, but my question to them always is, what are you doing with your day? What is your purpose when you wake up every day? And hopefully it's not just playing golf and lying on the beach, but it's actually knowledge transfer and helping, you know, young people to become better than what they are.
So what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Well, the future of leadership for me is an interesting one, because death and taxes, you know, are things that people talk about that are definites in the world, you know. I think leadership change is another one, because leadership cannot stand still. Leadership needs to continue, needs to grow. And but what's really important is that we need people in the world today that recognize the need for change and that embrace it and not see it as a threat. And I think for a lot of people that is the case. They might have very selfish reasons for that, and we see that in politics, very definitely the case, you know. So those things need to change, because I think the lifespan of leadership has shortened greatly as the years have gone by. In the past, a leader in a position somewhere, whatever he's doing, you know, might be a leader there for 40 years or 30 years or whatever. That doesn't happen anymore. People are changing jobs more regularly. It's seen in a negative sense. It shouldn't be. People need to grow, and, you know, it's an Americanism maybe, but you need to move laterally to move vertically. So people move around. So we're seeing a lot of change. So leaders are having to deal with not necessarily the same people for long periods of time, but new employees on a regular basis. How do they harness the best from those people? So their role in leadership is changing dramatically. And maybe someone who's been in a leadership position for, call it 25 years, it might be quite difficult for them to make that change, you know, and understand that young people today and people in business might be hot desking more than they like them to hot desk, you know, and, or operating in a certain strange way, or maybe feeling that they are disrespectful because they raise their hand in a meeting and challenge maybe something you've said. So how you work with employees as leaders, or even an employee, is definitely going to change going forward. And again as well, I think the world has become a lot faster. It's a speedy world. So how well equipped are our leaders to be able to deal with the speed of change? You know,
So,
and the speed of change, a lot of that is going to be digitally driven and is already digitally driven. So that could be a threat to a lot of people, not just to leaders, but for people that are working, you know, for leaders too. So leaders have really got to be able to multitask. They need to inspire people. You know, they need to make sure that they are drawing from people and giving people opportunities in an interactive way, and not simply passing down messages, which is the leadership of old.
so what have you learned from your own journey that you consider important for building future leaders?
Yep, I think the first thing, very importantly, is that the book of learning never closes. So you're learning all the time. I'm still learning. You know, I don't know everything, and I don't believe that there's any leader in the world that does know everything. So understand that and be open to learning and opportunity that comes with it. The other important element in today's world is to be able to balance power and compassion in any team that you're in. And yes, there are leaders who are leaders of themselves and don't necessarily lead a team, but just in the overall concept of having a group within a company or whatever it might be. You know, power is a very easy tool to use to your benefit. Compassion isn't necessarily always. So how do you balance that with people that you work with, I think becomes, or has been for me, a really important thing, because I've made mistakes with that too in the past. And you know, we must remember that we need to care for people too. You know, we need to build people into future leadership positions. And lastly, I would say it's incredibly important to be transparent and consistent. You know, if you're all over the place, you maybe don't necessarily build a close enough and a trustworthy relationship with the people around you. So don't be scared to be transparent. Don't be scared to admit failure, because we've all had failure in our lives in some form or another. And it's a difficult thing, especially for males sometimes, I feel, to actually express that and say, you know, I failed. I made a mistake. It's not an easy thing to say. So again, you learn these things as you go along, and perhaps those three things that I've mentioned are the most important for me on that journey.
Now, Gavin, when you teach your students and when you mentor youngsters, what do you advise them to focus on to future-proof their career?
If I try and look ahead, and it's quite a difficult thing to do because we don't know where this world's going to, and it's really moving quite quickly, I have two words that I regularly use from a teaching perspective and when I'm sharing information and knowledge and thoughts with people. And those are the words innovation on the one side, and the other is reinvention. And if we take those two words and we unpack them, they come in different forms, because for some people innovation is simply maybe making a really fancy shoe or something, you know, something different. It's not only in product, it's in everything. Innovation in the way that you conduct a meeting as a chairman, you know, whatever it might be. So innovation in its broader sense is the one. Reinvention is the other. For me, reinvention is essentially taking something that's maybe working reasonably well, having a close look at it, trying to understand whether it's going to still be working well within a year and another 5 years' time. You know, don't be scared to change things that are working, because we get into comfort zones, I think, as leaders, when something's working quite well and we say, don't touch it. It's working really well. However, within 3 months, it might not be working that well. What about Bitcoin? You know, look at the situation with Bitcoin. There's maybe an example too, and it's maybe an extreme example, but don't believe that just because everything's working well now, or people think it, don't be scared to change it. Don't be scared to make changes within your team, you know, with the way that you do things, the way you conduct meetings, you know, the way you approach consumers, you know. Look at those things, reinvent all the time to stay one step ahead, you know. And I think perhaps the Apple brand is a very good example of that, you know, where they've moved ahead of everybody else all the time. They're moving ahead. You don't want to be a person who's not in a leadership position, but just be a follower. You don't. You want to generate new ideas, and I think our country, South Africa, has so many people that have so many good ideas, you know, that can be generated, and that just needs some direction as far as that's concerned. I also want to say that, you know, aspiring leaders in the future, be a team player. I'm lucky in that I've grown up in a world of being in teams, you know, whether the team is on the sports field or in business or wherever it might be. And I've always understood the concept of the acronym TEAM, Together Each Achieves More, as being really fundamental to the success that you want to achieve in the future. And so being a team player is really important. And then, as a leader, what is your primary role is the question you've got to ask yourself. And that's to develop the future team of leaders, the people around you, to develop those people to become future leaders. And this doesn't always happen, because I think people in leadership positions quite often surround themselves with people who may be inferior to themselves, or they feel are inferior. Don't. Bring people in who are better than you, whatever it might be, you know. But certainly work on people, succession planning, but work on people to become future leaders. And the world has too few great leaders.
Now, Gavin, when it comes to technology, which are the technologies that you envisage will be driving the leadership of the future?
Any tools that can speed up decision making. I think at the moment, if we consider the tool set that is available to us, you know, to young entrepreneurs that we talk about as well, and I spoke a little bit about the disruption of Uber, for example, Airbnb in the world today, you know. Think about tools, what is it, you know, and ultimately, if we look at the concept of IT, we look at the digital world will drive the future. That I think we all know, in whatever the form might be. And at the moment, there are many forms, you know, the Internet of Things, intelligence, for example, that exists, social media generally, digital. If it can provide the right level of interaction of people, which fundamentally is what it's there to do, and that's something that has been missing, I think, in our world, is interaction, because that's the new way of doing business. There's no question about it. So I really do think that the digital world in its entirety is the key to us going forward. And if we look at the social needs, you know, social media platforms that future leaders should master, which is, I think, you know, something very close to your heart too. Again, you know, if we look at unified comms, as we talk about today, you know, social networks that will be used for business, because I think to a certain extent, social media in South Africa hasn't always been used correctly from a business perspective. And the tools that are needed there with unified comms, which I see as part of the future, will be able to provide that, you know, so that we don't have so many people finding themselves getting into trouble through using the tools that do exist today. And, you know, whether it's professional through LinkedIn or videos, YouTube, photos, videos, Instagram, these tools exist today, but they won't necessarily always exist in the future. There'll be others too. There'll be new tools that will come onto the horizon. And leaders need to make sure that they have pretty good working knowledge of all of these, because that's very, very much the business of the future.
Now, Gavin, can you maybe share with us a success story or two from your own book of leadership, where you mentored somebody, or you helped an entrepreneur, or you advised one of your students, and they really took to heart and implemented what you taught them?
Yes, there are a number of stories, if you want to call them that, you know, or where somebody has maybe taken some advice, or they've been able to pick up on some ideas. And that very definitely has happened with people who are not necessarily 100% sure of themselves. A particular individual that I worked with didn't understand the concept of personal brand. His feeling was that personal brand belonged to famous people. Only famous people had personal brands. And when we unpacked this over a period of time, and he got to better understand the fact that, A, he had a personal brand, whether he liked it or not. How could he use that to his benefit, you know, going forward? And in the business he was in, he was a successful businessman to start with, but we were able to take him up a notch too by just drawing in a few extra things that could really make it work for him. And in the world today, perhaps the most important word between people, and whoever those people might be, is the word trust. we live in a world today that is not trustworthy, generally speaking. You know, people are concerned, people are selfish, people look after themselves maybe. What is the element of trust that you can develop with your consumer, with your fellow worker in your team, with your managing director, or whatever it might be? How can you use that word? So that became like an integral part of our program around developing his personal brand. And it is amazing what came out of this, because a lot of things that he was doing were quite humdrum and were quite antiquated in a way, his business practices, but he was successful with them. But tools were not an important part of it. The digital world was not a hugely important part of it, you know. And so we introduced that fairly slowly, got it going, because, you know, the market that he is involved with were also people that were quite conservative, quite rural, and were not also that well equipped digitally, you know, in their mind or in their pocket, so to speak. So that all changed. To not dramatically, but it changed over a period of time, and he eventually became a guy who was able to grow his business globally. So it was not just a South African business, but it became a global business. And it was a slow process, and it still is work in progress, of course. But I was particularly pleased that he was prepared to embrace, you know, a more modern thought process, you know, thought leadership in its modern sense, because I believed it was the right thing for him to do. And the fact that he did embrace that and then took it and put it into practice and helped to grow that, you know, to the point where he is now. And it's not a mega business at all, but it's a business, you know, that is work in progress, as I say, but it's a growing business. So I think little things like that, you know, and I say little things because it might translate economically, to, you know, to a reasonable level for him, or in my eyes anyway. But I saw that as a success. For me, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to take somebody, as I said to you earlier, my purpose, you know, make people better than what they are. And I'd like to think in this case, he certainly is better than he was.
Now, Gavin, your career was spanning both the sporting world and the business world. So I'm very interested to find out, who are the role models that you would really recommend youngsters should study, maybe learn from?
It's an interesting question insofar as it's quite difficult to narrow down maybe less than 10 people. You know, there's a lot of people over a period of time that are inspirational to you from a leadership point of view. However, it's necessary, you know, and I can say unequivocally there's two people that certainly jump out at me. And in both cases, these individuals have come from a tarnished background. One of them from a very poor family, and one who left school at a very early age and turned his life into success. This guy that I'm going to mention to you now is not one of them, but there was a guy, Tony Factor, in South Africa who was involved with retail business. He was chronically dyslexic. And, you know, he didn't have a great start in life, but he made a huge success of it ultimately. But he's not one of the two that I want to mention to you. The one is probably no surprise. It's Richard Branson. And I think that's the feeling of a lot of people too. And the things I like about Richard Branson, you know, is he's daring, he's innovative, he's caring. He is an entrepreneurial spirit. And one little story that I heard about him, you know, he's in the UK. He hears about a South African woman working for his organization down in Cape Town who's terminally ill. He gets on a plane, he flies out to South Africa, he goes to visit this employee of his. Now, that takes a special person because it's easy to just disregard that or maybe even send a note or get your secretary to send a note. He, in person, went across and saw this lady, you know, who ultimately passed on. That is a capturing story, besides the things I said a bit earlier about him being innovative and daring and caring. The second one is Howard Schultz. Now, Howard Schultz came from a very poor family in the Bronx in the United States, and he ultimately became the head of Starbucks. And here was a man who understood that hard work would get you somewhere, you know, and he started at the bottom and worked his way up, you know, to a point where, you know, a very, very successful global brand and a lot of high levels of consistency with the way that they do things. And I mentioned the word consistency being important a little bit earlier for future leaders, you know, be consistent. He's certainly done that. So two, not rags to riches stories, but two stories of people, you know, who perhaps were on the back foot when they started and ended up being very much on the front foot. And there's so many things about those two individuals that I think people can draw from and use successfully in their future. Not least as well, the fact that Branson is one of the most vocal leaders in the world today who talks about the importance of work-life balance. And we're all very guilty to talk about taking leave and, you know, vacation time and that sort of thing. And he clearly understands, you know, the importance of having that balance in your life. And I mean, he must be an incredibly busy man, but he finds time, certainly, for that work-life balance in his life. And there's another, perhaps simple example of how we can learn from him.
Absolutely. So, Gavin, where can people follow you? How can they connect with you?
Well, I'm, you know, retired from mainstream business, so to speak, but I'm very project-driven. I'm doing a lot of little things, many of which I've mentioned too, you know. And I don't have a formal company that I'm operating from. I operate as an individual, and where there is need, you know, I get involved. So I'm on LinkedIn and active enough on LinkedIn, so, you know, people can always get hold of me there, and my details are there. And, you know, obviously on mail as well. You know, I'm very involved on email. So my email address is gavin.cowley@outlook.com. And I'm always open to people approaching me, you know. And Nick, the other thing is that, you know, although these are not a lot of formal ways of getting hold of me, they certainly are opportunities. But I'm open to anybody approaching me at any point in time, anywhere too, you know. So often if I'm going through a mall or I happen to be in a social environment, you know, people often come up to me and we talk about various things. Not least, I've just written a book on our family history, which took me 14 years to complete, and that was something very close to my heart. So I have people, you know, bumping into me in the street and asking me about things. So I'm very much open to people making contact.
So last but not least, Gavin, is there one thing you would ask your listeners to take away from this interview and implement in their own life, in their own leadership?
I would say that what for me is really important, what I see in other people or like to see in other people, and I want people to see in me too, is to be authentic. You know, to be the best that you can possibly be, and I want to put the word always behind that. So always be authentic, always be the best that you can possibly be. And the world is just like that your best might not be the winner, but it is the best that you can be, you know. And if you are comfortable that you could put your head down on a pillow at night and say, I really tried my best today, and I didn't make it, you know, because the world is really hums around champions, you know, the very best. But there are people that don't achieve number one position that have also tried their best. So be the best you can possibly be, and be authentic always.
Well, Gavin, thank you so much. Your passion for excellence is a great inspiration. You're helping many people, and I believe you're helping many people at the right place where they start their businesses, or even before they start their businesses. So thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.
It's a great pleasure, Nick.